So, this is chapter 3, and I'll start with a summary. Savasti meets the Buddha for the first time and makes him a gift of kusa grass, which is a type of grass that the buffalo eats, to use as a meditation cushion. So, Savasti was the only provider for his family since his mom and his dad died very young. So, he was the only one that brought home money and food. And because of this, he was very aware and mindful of how to keep his job and how to spend his money. So, from this, we can learn that when we don't have to work for things, we take things for granted. This leads a person to become very irresponsible and creates karma that only causes suffering and pain in the future. But Master mentioned that suffering, like everything we experience, is two sides of a coin. We simply need to be able to see the other side, and then we can learn from it. We can see the beauty both in our suffering and in our pleasures. We must learn from each experience, both good and bad, both displeasure and pleasure. Only then can we progress spiritually. We must not lose our resolve or conviction to grow just because we are met with a setback or a difficult situation. And with a sincere heart and determination, the cosmic parent will guide us even if we don't ask them to. So, like I said before, when you cultivate and when you try to grow spiritually, you will be met with lots of challenges, lots of obstacles, and you will fail a lot more than you will succeed. But that is a path to cultivation. That is a lesson for you to show your determination and not be afraid to fail, to keep going forward, and to try to again encode good things more than the bad things. And Master further makes commentary that for a beginner, it is good to practice patience, it is good to practice kindness, and it's good to practice compassion. These 3 points I think everyone can do with or without a teacher, and it will actually help you code only good things as opposed to the bad things. Master also mentioned that having understanding is extremely important because you have to have understanding in order to judge a situation with wisdom so that you don't act in ignorance and create bad karma. And thus, knowledge is important to have in order to understand. But like we mentioned in previous chapter, knowledge can act as a barrier. So you should know only enough for you to grow. If you know too much, it can stop you from progressing. Understanding is one thing Master mentioned, but realization is something completely different. So, what is the difference between understanding and realization? When you realize something, it comes from your own experience, and the key point here is experience, not from your knowledge, from your experience. You have to experience it. For instance, we can talk about pain or happiness. You can read it from a book, but if you don't experience what pain is like, if you don't experience what happiness is, then you would never really know what it is. Like falling in love, for example. You can read it in a book, but if you don't realize it, if you don't experience it, then you won't actually know what it is like to fall in love or to be happy or to be in pain. So each of those things that we experience is actually a lesson for us to grow. So that's also a part of practice to go out there and explore. But again, having understanding is extremely important because only with understanding can you make a better and better decision to help you grow spiritually. So don't work like a water buffalo and not understand anything, but you have to balance it out with competency, diligence, and understanding for you to continue to grow spiritually. And something to note here is that Savasti back then there are in India was they had caste system, and Savasti was part of the caste, the lowest of the castes. He was called an untouchable, meaning that he was, you can call him the peasant, even below a peasant. So he was the lowest of the low in social standing in society in India at that time. And the Buddha was not the least bit worried, and he came and touched Savasti on the head. This part was very beautiful. So what does it say? It says the Buddha has ended all ignorance, and he see all living beings with compassion and kindness, and every living being was beautiful in his eyes, and he saw none living being as superior to another living being or inferior to another living being. So what does it mean the Buddha has ended all ignorance? It means that one of the things that he accomplished, at least that we mentioned, is that he has put an end to his ego. His ego is now gone. He doesn't see Savasti as an untouchable. He simply sees Savasti as a human being, and with kindness and compassion. Master made a commentary here and said and noted that our mind is extremely discriminatory. We have a lot of biases and conceptions in our mind. This is why we act and hurt other people. It's because we see them as different from ourselves. And part of cultivation is to remove the biases, to remove our preconceived conception, and to let go of our ego. Transform our ego into kindness, compassion, and wisdom. So the Buddha was able to do that very successfully, which is why he was not at all bothered that Savasti was considered an untouchable. He simply saw him as another human and touched him with loveness and kindness and compassion. So Savasti felt this kindness from the Buddha because no one had ever touched him so lovingly before. So Savasti wanted to make an offering to the Buddha, but of course he was very poor, and he didn't have anything to offer the Buddha. And so the Buddha taught him to go ahead and grab some kusa grass, make a meditation mat for him so he can sit down. I think this part was very beautiful, and what did we learn from this? So the Buddha saw the sincerity in Savasti, and because the Buddha felt respect and sincerity from Savasti, he willingly accepts Savasti's offering. So when we treat our spiritual teacher or someone who's enlightened with respect and sincerity and a heart to grow, they will respond accordingly. They will help you. But it is so important that you treat your teacher with the best respect that you can give and with the best sincerity that you can give, because they're the one who can help liberate you and guide you to spiritual liberation. So it is extremely important to have respect and sincerity. And that small bundle of kusa grass was worth much more than someone who's rich and gave $1 million or $1 billion out of disrespect, out of non-sincerity. So you can be very poor, but if you have respect and sincerity, that's all that the Buddha needs. He simply needs you to act out of your heart and out of your mind. He doesn't need you to be rich. He doesn't need you to be poor, right? He just needs you to be sincere and respectful. And then you can be taught. And then you can be guided. And the, something that Master kind of mentioned and further elaborated on was the caste system of India. The caste system of India is actually very bad. It alienates people and separates them into groups that sometimes are out of their control. And the Buddha, out of kindness and compassion, tried to actually rectify this back then by making the caste system non-existent in his own followers, the people who follow him in his group. There were no caste system in his group. And Master further mentioned about sincerity. So what does it mean to be sincere? Sincerity means everything that you do comes from your heart and it comes from your mind. meaning that you shouldn't do things just out of, you know, oh, I'm doing it just for my master. It comes from a sense of, oh, I'm doing this because I feel respect. I'm doing this because I feel sincere, and I'm doing this because I want to learn and grow. That's sincerity. It comes from a place of deep inside your heart and in your mind that you want to grow, and that you can show that, display that to your teacher. That's all that they really need. Master also mentioned that about the having honesty and the danger of saying that you're enlightened when you're not really enlightened. So if someone who's not enlightened proclaims themselves as enlightened and they're not enlightened, the karma that they make is extremely heavy, very very heavy, and that will actually stop them many 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 lifetimes from actually progressing spiritually. So that's what we mentioned in previous chapter about honesty. You have to be honest. Don't say that you're enlightened, especially about enlightenment. Do not proclaim yourself to be enlightened if you're not enlightened. And respect for one's master. So Master mentioned that respect is extremely important. The respect here comes from a place, I think, of understanding. Many people you see would prostrate to monks not out of respect but out of blind faith, because they only want to create merit, and they only want to create merit to have a better life next life. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because when people prostrate, maybe not out of respect, but out of to create merit, at least during that moment, they're not thinking about doing something bad. They worry about creating merit so that they can maybe have a better life next life, so they can grow spiritually. So you can say there are different levels of respect and different reason why people prostrate. But I think if it comes from a place of goodness, then it is a good thing. So in terms of goodness, Master mentioned that you can either do good things passively or you can do things actively. When you practice spirituality or cultivation passively, you are still improving, but at a very, 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 very slow pace, as opposed to someone who's doing it actively. Another point that's not related to the last one is when we're making an offering, we should do it from our heart and from our mind. And like I said, that's all the Buddha needs. Like with Savasti, he can only offered him kusa grass because he was very poor, but he did it from his heart and from his mind, out of sincerity and respect. And that is all that the Buddha needs. So if you meet someone who's enlightened, don't worry that you're poor. Don't worry that you're rich. Just worry that what you're doing is out of sincerity and respect. And as long as you do something out of sincerity and respect, then that is good enough. And that is the end of chapter 3. Going to chapter 4, the summary here is Savasti meets Sujata for the first time. Sujata is the daughter of the village chief, that's the village that Savasti lives in. And Siddhartha tells them the story about the swan that was shot down by Devadatta's arrow. So we go back in time a little bit here, and Savasti brought his rice because he was meeting the Buddha to eat lunch with him. And Savasti's rice was very brown and very coarse. And Sujata's rice, the daughter of the village chief, was very white and very creamy. And Siddhartha did something very beautiful here, I think, is that he combined his own rice with Sujata's rice. So